Was it the best film of 2024 so far? Yes. Did I have an issue with it? Yes. A big one, and we'll get to that later as it comes at the end of the movie.
Is Dune the lesson Hollywood needs to learn?
Judging by how sold out these shows were and our usually near-empty theater was nowhere near staffed to handle this situation, but the answer, Doge, is absolutely. If you've ever had a job, you know the average bean counter can't think outside of their little box of beans. Most of them have no real idea how their business even functions, regardless of what that business is. The people like you, with boots on the ground, are the ones who know. You're the ones who get the job done. Consequently, suits historically have always been really good at copying things. That's why, like in the 60s and 70s, there were two of every show: Star Trek and Lost in Space, Munsters and the Addams Family, Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family, Twilight Zone and Outer Limits.
You could go on.
But I won't, you get the point. Even if they lacked any creativity themselves, they had enough sense to try and walk in the footsteps of the things that were working.
Like how Star Wars pushed James Bond into space.
Right, you are, Doge, although that's actually a really good example of how blindly following a trend isn't always necessarily a good thing. Which is where we find Hollywood now, blindly pulling the lever on the message over and over again, but not paying attention to what's working.
Insanity, bitches!
Here's a recent obvious example. Disney came back to James Gunn, hat in hand, saying, "We're so sorry we fired you.
Please, sir.
Please do Guardians 3. And he was like, "What?" Okay, fine, but it's my movie. You keep your mitts off of it. You get no input.
And it was the only hit they had last year.
Which brings us to Denis Villeneuve, another visionary director who knows what he's doing. Keep your hands off him. Let him cook, and he will make you money. Bear in mind, I'm not just talking about a director who makes great movies like The Arrival and Sicario, but more importantly, he pulls off the impossible. Like a sequel to Blade Runner, one of my all-time favorite movies and one I always thought should remain absolutely untouched. But he pulled it off. Not perfect, mind you, but I was more than happy enough with the results, and of course, the famously unfilmable Dune. I grew up with the 1984 David Lynch version in all of its incarnations, and despite its campy, quirky nature, I think it does the job pretty well.
The soundtrack by Toto was epic.
And contrary to popular belief, John Williams' son had nothing to do with that, as he joined Toto after that happened. Back to Denis Villeneuve, who blew the world away with Dune Part 1. Waters displayed some rare restraint here, not automatically greenlighting the second film when they greenlit the first one, but just 4 short days after that film's release, this film was greenlit. It picks up immediately where the first one left off, with Paul and his mother hiding out with the Fremen, who are increasingly becoming convinced that Paul is the one destined to bring balance to the Force.
I don't like sand.
A belief whose flames are fed by Lady Jessica, who is deliberately fashioning herself into becoming a cult leader to help her son's quest. The Harkonnens are increasing their stranglehold on Arrakis, and I'm sorry. I've been calling them Harkonnens for 30 years. It's kind of hard to stop that once you start. Harkonnens just sounds more threatening too, and it doesn't help that Frank Herbert himself is heard pronouncing it Harkonnens, but is also quoted as saying that however you want to pronounce things is just fine, which just seems like a really weird thing to say from someone who was so incredibly detailed in his world building and had so much effort put into it. Most creators would be really nitpicky with something as simple as pronunciation.
Look, I'm a Jedi master.
So the themes of the dangers of both religion and the cult of personality are fully explored. And remember when I said I had an issue with the film? I lied, as I realize as I'm talking to you now that I actually have 2 issues with the film, so here's the first one. The vital importance of the spice and how critical to the economy of the entire galaxy was downplayed in favor of spending time with themes that resonate more closely with today's social climate.
Like groupthink.
Exactly. That can be all well and good in the moment, but that might damage the long-term viability of the story over time. It might age better had they leaned into the spice more.
The spice must flow.
Lynch's version did this very well. We actually saw the Third Stage Guild Navigators, and they were some of the main drivers of the plot. terrified over the potential loss of the spice. In this version, we don't even see them at all, which kind of lends the viewer the impression that they don't care, which is not true. So instead of the guild navigators pushing the Emperor into action and driving the plot, it's the Bene Gesserit and their machinations. To those who already know, the plot unfolds largely the way you'd expect, with the exception of a fantastic deep dive into the Harkonnen homeworld and the introduction of Austin Butler's Feyd-Rautha. He really elevates the movie in a way the Lynch version didn't. In the Lynch version, the Harkonnens are a threat that fades rather quickly as the movie goes on. But here, as the Harkonnen threat starts to dwindle down, Feyd's introduction reignites and elevates the threat level immensely, which is something I really loved about this film. The casting and acting are all top-notch, with one notable exception, and that's a part of my big issue with the film that I'll get to in a second. Where J.J. Abrams is known for sun flares, Denis Villeneuve seems to really love his dreamlike sequences, and they serve the film really well with incredible visuals that really immerse you in the story. We live in an age of vapid, empty storytelling, usually infected with the message, and it's so incredibly refreshing to be offered something mature and with substance that doesn't assume the audience is a bunch of morons who are dazzled and amazed with just a bunch of flashy CGI. Which brings us to my biggest issue with the film. I have no real issue with Zendaya being cast. She was fine. It's what she had to work with in the last half of the movie, especially in the last few scenes. I imagine the script probably looked like this. Throughout the whole film, Paul is struggling with his visions. If he goes south, he loses Chani and ignites a holy war. Billions will die. He tells her this repeatedly in a variety of ways, over and over, in both words and actions. Even when they get to the point where he is faced with the reality that he must go south, he still tries to get out of it. It's true to his character and to him. It makes complete sense. So of course, he ends up going south, ultimately at her urgings.
And what he foresaw came to pass.
And she spends the end of the movie just glaring at him and ultimately running away, all up in her feelings, despite knowing what would happen, despite knowing she would have to marry the Emperor's daughter to secure the throne. Who was she mad at? Him? He told her what was going to happen, and once those wheels were in motion, there was no stopping it. Was she mad at herself for falsely believing things would be different? She didn't grow up watching Disney movies. She was a Fremen. They lived a hard life. Reality came first. Always, or you die. Sean Young's Chani in Lynch's version understood that and stood by him in the end. For me, this made absolutely no sense for the character, but seemed to make more sense in the context of the message. I came across this comment about the film that really resonated with me. One of the elements that makes this story so powerful and timeless, look at how many male role models Paul is surrounded with. He needs them in order to become who he is meant to become. And all of those men are excellent, honorable, and each a master of his craft. This movie adaptation stayed true to it. Despite the times being as they are, denigration and humiliation of men is almost mandatory in Hollywood productions. Dune delivers what we all need. Protagonists we can genuinely look up to and wish we could have the honor of their acquaintance. When they make Dune Messiah, and I have little doubt that they will given the box office already so far, what's the game plan? Is she going to girl boss out? Are we going to the message? Is she going to lead a rebellion against Paul?
What happens in the book?
If I remember correctly, she dies in childbirth, leaving twins behind.
So, Padme.
Right.
Maybe she's already pregnant and that's why she's acting this way.
That's a possibility, I guess. Either way, tonally, it felt forced. It didn't ring true. But what did you guys think? Let me know and stay fresh, cheesebags.